The horse's hooves made no sound as it approached behind me on the forest path. I realized too late that no living creature moves in such perfect silence, especially one carrying a rider whose head rested not upon his shoulders, but in the crook of his arm. Before we journey into the dark heart of the Black Forest, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You'll want to know when more folklore horrors emerge from the shadows. Now, let's begin. The Black Forest of Germany holds many secrets. Ancient trees stand sentinel over hidden paths where sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor. Locals say that when darkness falls completely, time itself behaves differently among those trees, and things that should not exist find their way into our world. The oldest families in the region still hang protective iron horseshoes above their doors, not for luck, as they tell tourists, but as wards against what rides the forest paths after midnight. I never would have ventured deep into those woods had my grandfather not died, leaving me a peculiar inheritance. A small cottage on the edge of a village called Schwarzbach, deep within the Black Forest. My mother had left Germany decades ago, never speaking of her childhood home. When I asked why we never visited, her expression would darken. "Some places are better left forgotten," she would say. Now, as the last surviving member of my family, the responsibility of this property fell to me. The village of Schwarzbach seemed frozen in time. Stone buildings with steep roofs clustered around a medieval church, its spire rising above the tree line. As I drove through the narrow streets, I noticed how the residents watched me, not with hostility, but with a peculiar wariness, as if assessing whether I knew something I shouldn't. The local innkeeper, Frau Müller, handed me the keys to my grandfather's cottage with surprising reluctance. "The place has been empty for many years," she said in heavily accented English. "It would be better to sell it, I think. I know people who would buy it. Good price." When I mentioned I planned to stay at least a few weeks to sort through my grandfather's belongings, her face paled. "Then you must promise to be inside before dark." "Always. The forest paths are treacherous at night." The cottage stood apart from the village, along a dirt road that disappeared into dense forest. A simple stone structure with heavy wooden shutters, it looked like something from a fairy tale, the kind where children meet unfortunate ends. Inside, a layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise, it seemed as if my grandfather had simply stepped out momentarily. Books lined the walls, many dealing with local folklore and history. His reading glasses still rested on an open volume on his desk. That first evening, as I unpacked by lamplight, a knock at the door startled me. An elderly man stood on the threshold, his weathered face solemn beneath a shock of white hair. He introduced himself as Klaus Weber, my grandfather's oldest friend. "I came to warn you," he said without preamble. "Heinrich, your grandfather, he died because he forgot the old rules. Or perhaps he chose to ignore them. Either way, the result was the same." "My grandfather died of a heart attack," I replied, remembering the death certificate. Klaus's expression remained grave. "That is what the doctor wrote, yes. But what caused his heart to stop? That is the question you should ask." He glanced nervously at the darkening forest beyond the cottage. "May I come in? There are things you must know if you intend to stay here." Over a glass of my grandfather's schnapps, Klaus told me about the Horseman. According to local legend, centuries ago, a nobleman renowned for his cruelty ruled these lands. He would hunt not just animals but people, peasants who strayed too far into his forest domain. One midwinter night, the villagers finally rose against him, chasing him into the depths of the Black Forest where they beheaded him. But death was not the end for him, Klaus continued, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. His hatred was too strong. Now he rides through the forest after dark, seeking those who wander the paths. They say he collects their heads, thinking that one day he will find his own among them. I might have dismissed this as superstition, except for the tremor in Klaus's hands and the fear in his eyes as he spoke. Heinrich was researching the legend, he explained. He believed he had discovered the location of the horseman's burial place, and with it, a way to end his curse forever. And you think this horseman is what killed my grandfather? Klaus nodded solemnly. Heinrich was found on the forest path halfway between here and the village. No marks upon him except... He hesitated. Except what? A thin line around his neck, as if traced by a blade that didn't quite cut. And his face? Klaus shuddered. His face wore an expression of such terror that the undertaker couldn't fully compose it. Before leaving, Klaus showed me the protective measures my grandfather had installed. Iron nails driven into the doorframe, rowan branches above the windows, and a horseshoe above every entrance. Keep these in place, he warned. And whatever happens, whatever you hear, do not leave the cottage after dark. That night, I discovered my grandfather's journal hidden behind his collection of folklore books. The most recent entries detailed his research into the Horseman legend. He had apparently found references to a hidden grave deep in the forest, marked by a stand of 9 yew trees. According to his notes, if the horseman's severed head could be reunited with his remains under the light of a new moon, his spirit would finally be at rest. The final entry, dated the day of his death, read only, "I have found it. Tonight, I will end this." Sleep came fitfully that night. The wind in the pines sounded too much like whispers, and more than once, I startled awake thinking I'd heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Shortly before dawn, I woke to the distinct feeling I was being watched. Through a gap in the curtains, I glimpsed a dark shape at the edge of the forest, a tall figure that seemed to melt back into the trees as my eyes focused. The next day, I ventured into the village to learn more. At the small local museum, I found a centuries-old map of the forest that marked a clearing with 9 trees, exactly as my grandfather had described. The elderly curator watched me with concern as I studied it. "You are Heinrich Schmidt's grandchild," she stated rather than asked. "You have his curiosity. That is not always a blessing." When I inquired about the marked clearing, her expression tightened. "That place has an evil history. The old lord is buried there, or most of him. The villagers feared that if his head was buried with his body, he would return in the flesh, so they cast it into a bottomless pool elsewhere in the forest." That evening, Klaus returned with an unexpected gift, a sword with an intricately worked iron hilt. "It belonged to your grandfather," he explained. "The metal is cold iron, forged with special rites. It is said such weapons can harm even those who have already died once. You don't seriously expect me to use this?" Klaus's expression remained grave. "I hope you will not need to. But the new moon comes tomorrow night, and the horseman rides more frequently in the 3 nights before it. If you insist on staying here, keep this close." That night, the sounds from the forest intensified. Branches breaking as if under heavy hooves, and once, unmistakably, the distant whinny of a horse. I clutched my grandfather's sword, its metal cold against my palm, and watched the forest line until dawn broke. The next day, I couldn't resist. Using my grandfather's journal and the old map, I set out in daylight to find the clearing with the 9 yews. The path was overgrown, barely visible in places, but I pressed on, determined to see this place for myself. The journey took hours, the forest growing denser and darker the further I traveled. When I finally reached the clearing, the atmosphere changed palpably. The 9 ancient yew trees stood in a perfect circle around what was clearly a burial mound. The air felt thick and still, no birds sang, and even the wind seemed to avoid this place. At the center of the mound was a depression, as if something had been recently disturbed or removed. Had my grandfather excavated the grave? Was he planning to somehow find the severed head and reunite it with the body? As I turned to leave, something glinted among the roots of the largest yew. Brushing away decades of accumulated forest debris, I uncovered a tarnished silver container, a reliquary of some kind. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a small, withered object that could only be described as mummified, the remains of a human ear. The sun was already low when I started back, casting long shadows through the trees. I walked briskly, then jogged, then ran as the light faded faster than seemed natural. Night in the forest fell like a curtain, sudden and complete. The path that had been clear hours earlier now seemed to twist and double back on itself. I was lost. My flashlight began to flicker, its beam weakening. In the distance, I heard it, the rhythmic beat of hooves on packed earth, approaching steadily. Panic rose in my throat as I remembered I'd left my grandfather's sword at the cottage. The sound grew closer, circling my position. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the approaching hoofbeats. Something moved in the darkness beyond my failing light, something large that displaced the air as it moved. My flashlight died completely. In the perfect darkness, I heard the slow, deliberate sound of boots on fallen leaves, circling me. Then a voice spoke, a horrible, rasping whisper that seemed to come not from a human throat but from the space where one should be. "You carry a piece of me," it said. "The reliquary." It wanted the relic I'd found. "Your grandfather thought he could end my hunt," the voice continued, now behind me. I spun, seeing nothing in the absolute blackness. But he only gave me new purpose. Now his blood calls to me. Your blood. A cold wind brushed my neck, and with it came the unmistakable sound of metal sliding against leather, a sword being drawn from its scabbard. In desperation, I pulled out the silver reliquary and held it before me like a talisman. "Is this what you want? Your remains?" The presence paused. I could feel its attention fixed on the small container in my hand. "I can help you," I said, my voice shaking. "I know where you're buried. I know about the pool where your head was thrown. My grandfather found these things. That's what he was trying to do, help you rest." A heavy silence followed, broken only by my ragged breathing. Then, impossibly, a match flared in the darkness, illuminating a scene from Nightmare. Before me stood a tall figure in archaic noble's clothing, astride a massive black horse. Where his head should have been, there was nothing, just a cleanly severed neck. In the crook of his left arm, he carried his own head, its eyes open and fixed on me. His right hand held not a sword as I had feared, but the still burning match. "Show me," the severed head commanded. What choice did I have? I led the horseman back toward the clearing with the 9 ewes, the sound of his horses' hooves now clearly audible behind me. The creature made no move to harm me, but I felt its constant gaze on my back like a physical weight. At the burial mound, I placed the reliquary on the disturbed earth at the center. "My grandfather's journal mentioned a pool where your head was cast," I said. "If that's true, I could help you find it." The horseman dismounted, moving with unnatural grace for a being so monstrous. He placed his severed head upon the mound, positioning it to watch me. Then he knelt and opened the reliquary, examining its contents with gloved hands. "This is not mine," he said finally, his voice coming impossibly from the head several feet away. "This belonged to the servant who betrayed me to the villagers. Your grandfather found many such relics, thinking they would lead him to my resting place." The head's eyes narrowed, but he already knew where that was, just as he knew where my head truly lies. A cold realization washed over me. "The cottage," I whispered. "He hid it at the cottage." The head smiled, a horrific sight on its disembodied face. "Now you understand. Why do you think I allowed him to live in that place for so many years? I could sense my remains nearby, calling to me, but I could not enter without invitation. The protections were too strong." "But you killed him in the end," I said, backing away slowly. "He was leaving, taking what was mine far away. I could not permit that." The horseman stood, retrieving his head before remounting his steed. "Now you will take me to my head. Once I am whole again, I will show mercy by granting you a quick death." I ran. Through the dark forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, the horseman pursued at a deliberate pace, never rushing but never falling behind. Somehow, I found the path back to the cottage, bursting through the door and slamming it shut, engaging every lock. Outside, the horseman circled the building, testing its boundaries. The iron nails and horseshoes seemed to pain him when he drew too close. He could approach but not enter. Through the windows, I could see him circling, his headless body always oriented toward the cottage as his severed head watched with calculating eyes. Dawn came eventually, and with it, the horseman retreated to the forest depths. I collapsed in exhaustion but knew I could not rest long. The new moon would rise that night, and with it would come my final confrontation with the horseman. I tore the cottage apart, searching for anything that could be the horseman's head. The cellar, the attic, behind every book and under every floorboard. Nothing. By mid-afternoon, I was about to admit defeat when I noticed something odd about my grandfather's chair by the fireplace. The cushion seemed unusually firm. Slicing it open revealed the truth. Inside, preserved by some unknown method, was a mummified human head. Unlike the withered ear in the reliquary, this was perfectly preserved, its skin like tanned leather, its features frozen in an expression of rage. Around its neck was a gold chain bearing a nobleman's seal, the same design I had seen in the village museum. As sunset approached, I faced an impossible choice. I could try to destroy the head, perhaps by burning it, but my grandfather had tried something similar, judging by the scorch marks visible on the mummified skin, and had clearly failed. Or I could do what my grandfather had apparently planned. Return the head to its body under the new moon and hope that the legends were true, that this would finally end the horseman's curse. I chose the latter. Taking both the sword Klaus had given me and the mummified head, I set out for the clearing with the 9 ewes while daylight still held. This time, I marked my path carefully, tying strips of cloth to branches to ensure I could find my way back. I reached the burial mound as the sun's final rays filtered through the forest canopy. Working quickly, I dug into the center of the mound where the depression had been, uncovering what I had expected. A skeleton, headless, dressed in the rotted remains of once fine clothing. Around its neck was a gold chain that matched the one on the mummified head. As darkness fell completely, I waited at the edge of the clearing, the head placed on the exposed bones, my grandfather's sword gripped tightly in my hands. The new moon provided virtually no light, but I dared not use my flashlight for fear of drawing attention before I was ready. The forest fell silent as midnight approached. Then came the familiar sound, hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, approaching the clearing. The massive black horse emerged from the trees, its rider upright in the saddle. But something was different. The horseman no longer carried his head. His body moved with purpose toward the burial mound, kneeling beside it. A voice spoke from the mummified head, though its lips did not move. At last, it said, "I'm made whole again." The horseman's body lifted the preserved head and placed it atop his neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a change rippled through the air. The head seemed to soften, flesh becoming less leathery, more lifelike. The eyes opened, now filled with a terrible awareness. "The curse is broken," the now complete horseman said, his voice coming naturally from his restored head. "I am free to leave this forest." Horror flooded through me as I realized my mistake. I hadn't ended his curse, I had fulfilled it. The legends had been wrong, or deliberately misleading. Reuniting the horseman with his head hadn't put him to rest. It had made him whole, removing the limitations that had kept him bound to the forest. The horseman turned to me, a terrible smile spreading across his face. "For this service, I grant you life," he said. so that you may witness what you have unleashed upon the world." He mounted his steed and rode toward the forest edge, not back into the depths, but toward the path that led to the village. I pursued desperately, but the horse moved with supernatural speed. By the time I reached the village, screams already filled the night air. In the years since, I have hunted the Horseman across Germany and beyond. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him, a tall figure on horseback silhouetted against the night sky, or reports of mysterious beheadings in rural areas. Always, he remains one step ahead of me. I've learned more of the true history now. The villagers didn't execute a cruel nobleman. They beheaded a profoundly evil being that had taken human form. By separating his head from his body and keeping them apart, they had limited his power and bound him to the forest. My grandfather had discovered the truth too late. His journal's final pages, which I found hidden in the cottage chimney, revealed his horror at realizing his mistake and his desperate, failed attempt to destroy the head before the Horseman claimed him. Now I carry my grandfather's sword and his burden. I hunt the creature I foolishly made whole, searching for a way to undo my terrible mistake. Sometimes, in small villages near ancient forests, people help me, those who remember the old stories and recognize the danger. More often, I'm met with skepticism and fear. After all, who would believe in a headless horseman in this modern age? But if you find yourself on a forest path as darkness falls, and hear the sound of approaching hooves that make no imprint on the ground, do not look back. Run for the nearest threshold and don't stop until you're safely inside. And whatever you do, never invite a stranger in after dark, especially one who keeps his face hidden in shadow. If this journey into German folklore left you checking your doorways for iron horseshoes, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on for more original horror tales from around the world. Leave a comment telling me which moment sent chills down your spine, and if you know someone who appreciates folklore horror, share this with them. They'll thank you, or never walk in forests after dark again. Until next time, remember to check your door frames for protective symbols.